Welcome to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother podcast. This episode, we are being sponsored by Chutzpah Coffee. It's a house blend, lightly roasted, boldly Jewish. Let's just go ahead and open this up.
I just love coffee.
Tell me about your,
So,
your addiction
so
to coffee.
show the French press. We're going to use a French press for this.
Yes, the French press.
A French press. Yeah, the French press was very much popularized by what's it? Michael C. Hall and in the series Dexter. In the beginning, he has the French
That
press.
smells nice.
Oh gosh,
That smells great. That smells.
Oh, I love the smell of coffee. I love
What was your first cup of coffee when you were a kid?
Well, my mother, of course, when I was little, the big deal was the new instant coffee, because people were like, wow, they were so enthralled that now I don't have to perk the coffee. I can just take hot water and throw a couple teaspoons of coffee, and I've got coffee. So it was actually, if you Google the history of instant coffee, it was developed during World War II for the soldiers in the field. So instead of them needing like percolators or strainers, whatever, they could just get hot water and throw a couple tablespoons of coffee in and have it. So after World War II, it became commercialized. And so I had this coffee. And what happened was I was a very hyperactive kid. So my pediatrician recommended that my mother give me what we call French coffee. It's boiled up or heated up milk with instant coffee and a couple of teaspoons of sugar, and that's French coffee. So I would have that every morning, and I loved it. And they and so then I was practically, when I was in high school and college. Oh, don't ask. Instant coffee was practically all I lived off of, which is why when I was in high school I was so thin.
So they diagnosed you with some kind of disorder and they told you the cure was coffee. How old were you when this happened?
Maybe about 18 months. My mother put it in my bottle.
18 months.
Maybe 18 months, 2 years, something like that.
Wow. Wow.
And so I loved coffee. I always loved coffee. And then I noticed, like when I would go to restaurants or when I would be out, as at the different, eating places, they used regular perked coffee.
Mhm.
That's when I was in college, was when the coffee makers came out. Well, the coffee makers originally were for restaurants and eating place, short order eating places. And then eventually they became, of course, commercialized and the average person could buy them. And so I noticed that there was a big difference between my instant coffee and the nice perk coffee that I was buying or getting at different simchas. So I remember when your sisters were little, there was a secondhand store that opened up on the corner. And I was in there one time with them, buying them some little, cheap secondhand toys, whatever, they were not cheaper. And I see a percolator, a stovetop percolator. And I said, wow. I said, you know what? I'm going to try regular coffee for a change. So I took the stovetop percolator home with me. Of course, I koshered it. I cleaned it up very well and koshered it. And went to the store and bought, I forgot what I bought, the regular Maxwell House, whatever, Folgers, you name it. And
I'm just using this as an advertisement.
oh, yes, yes,
We're a
yes.
paid sponsor, so today this is the first ever.
Oh, it smells so good. And I noticed like the difference right away. I mean, when you have per coffee, it's like, you smell it through the house and it smells so good. And it's a lot stronger. It's got that nice, brewed coffee flavor. And then after that, I was just hooked on percolated coffee.
So yeah, so chutzpah coffee. It's like it smells great. I haven't tasted it yet, but in about 2.5 minutes we will try it.
When you use a French press, how long do you
I use about 4.5 minutes.
Uh-huh.
4.5 minutes. They say 4 to 5 minutes, so 4.5 minutes is the time that I use, and it gets a nice, good flavor. This is lightly roasted, so the caffeine is a little more intense, but it'll be good to go.
Well, I bought about last year. I decided to buy a stovetop an old-fashioned stovetop percolator, because I had heard that the coffee from a stovetop percolator is a lot stronger and the brewing just makes it taste better, as opposed to your quickie, your quickie uh, the electric coffee makers. Heard the stovetop is supposed to be better. So I bought a stovetop, and uh, to my surprise, I found that when you pour the coffee right from the stovetop percolator, even if you do use a filter inside, which I did use a filter, it still had granules of coffee in it. So it's like I had to filter it twice.
Yeah, the
Yeah, I mean, it did taste better, but I had to filter it twice. It's like, so what ends are you willing to go to get that nice, delicious cup of coffee? And then finally, the little glass top of the percolator broke. And I said, okay, that's it. Forget it. I'm just going to use my $20, $20 electric coffee maker.
so the main topic for today is what brought you to Frumkite and what keeps you there?
The same thing that brought me to coffee. It's delicious.
Absolutely nutritious. Because we had this conversation a couple days ago.
What's the correlation between coffee and Frumkite?
Sure. Because it's
Genuine.
well, yeah.
Real perk coffee is genuine as opposed to instant.
Instant coffee. I like instant coffee.
I was reading something once that I always suspected about instant coffee.
Yeah.
I always suspected that the beans that were used in instant coffee were inferior. I had nothing to back up my claim, but somehow I felt that. And then one day I was reading an article about instant coffee versus, perked coffee. And yes, that's true. They do use inferior beans in instant coffee.
Interesting. So I guess someone's at the door. Let me just go ahead and get that.
Should I get the door?
No, stay here. I'll
Stay
take care
here
of
and
the
drink
door.
the coffee.
Review the coffee. It is Chutzpah coffee.
It's Chutzpah coffee.
It's Chutzpah coffee.
Chutzpah coffee. We need.
Um,
Should I use a fork to stir my coffee?
yeah, sure.
I often
Just
thought
go
it
ahead
was
and shake this.
thought it was like boorish, but it's like low class to use a silver spoon to use
Go ahead, try the coffee and review it.
Okay, right. Well, I want more of the creamer. Go ahead. I want to get more. I want to get more creamer. This is vanilla oat milk. I've been using oat milk lately instead of regular milk. Oh, here it is. Let's try it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kol b'dvarav.
Amazing. So, as you drink it, let's try to stir mine. Let's try it.
Has that nice coffee.
It's a good coffee. It's got a nice firm flavor to it. You really can. It's like when you buy these mainstream coffee places, a lot of stuff gets lost in the ether where they're just trying to mass produce things. I think this is more like a craft coffee.
Yes, I would agree with
Craft
that.
coffee for sure. It's good. It's
I didn't
really
even have to
good.
put- I didn't even have to add sugar to it.
No, no sugar at all. You don't need sugar. You don't need anything to spruce it up. The coffee itself. I mean, you might even be able to take it black, but let's not push it there. I know. You don't do black coffee.
Black.
But we were talking about your great grandparents that were from Poland, Hungary, Russia. They were all from, and that your mother's mother
Hmm.
wore a shaitel and had a shaitel for Shabbos and a shaitel for the week.
That's right. I remember my mother talking about that. Yes.
And you were saying that the frustrations you were having were that feeling of people saying, "Yes, I'm Jewish, but," and really stopping that flow of being proud of your Yiddishkeit. And I think it's having a comeback now. I think people are getting tired of the as a Jew kind of person where they just kind of use that as a ploy to just placate to everyone else and not really stand up for their Yiddishkeit.
I think so too. It's like like you would like as a non-religious Jew, I would go places and I would eat, of course, the chazarah and everything. I didn't keep kosher outside the house. And people would kind of like look at me, make comments, hey, aren't you Jewish? Yada yada. And it's like it's like it's almost like a sense of embarrassment. It's like, yeah, I'm Jewish, but I don't really keep this, I don't really keep that, yada yada type thing. And make excuses. Well, it's my cultural identity, but I don't really keep shops. I don't keep, and it's like you feel like you're always making excuses. I had an incident that happened in high school where I was at this boy's party, this non-Jewish boy. He would have these really nice parties in his house. Really, I forgot what his name was. I think his last name was I forgot what his name was, but he had these. He was a nice guy. He had these really nice parties at his house where he'd invite like a bunch of kids and nothing wild, nothing dirty. He would, play. He would play play the stereo, play all our favorite records, and we would dance. And he would bring out refreshments and just a nice evening of you know.
How old was this guy?
We were in high school. It was like
Well,
16,
how old was the guy hosting the
he
party?
was like 17, 16,
Okay,
16,
all right.
17. He was one of our friends. And it was like one, like I said, none of these crazy wild marijuana smoking for drug
Just
parties.
terrible.
It is terrible.
I
It's
know.
nice to have a memory of a really nice,
Yeah,
kind of G-rated
very
party
G-rated.
where everyone's just having a good time and
No
no
one's ripping
one's
bong hits. No one's
mm,
getting hammered. No one's
yeah,
playing beer pong. No one's snorting coke in the bathroom. It's
right.
just very nice, decent, good, clean fun.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he came out with this big plate of ham sandwiches.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, of course, I'm not religious. I don't keep kosher outside the house. So I grabbed one of the ham, and as I stuck it in my mouth, something happened to the electrical system. The um the record that I don't know if someone kicked the plug right, but all of a sudden the music stopped and all the lights went out except this one little light that was right above me. And it was Terry Jones. Terry Jones was his name. Terry turns around and laughs and says, "Hey, everybody, Charlene Dickman's eating a ham sandwich." And I've got this ham sandwich like dangling out of my mouth. I'm like, "Ugh."
The Jew guilt kicks in. See, it's funny you say that because on the opposite end, when I was at work the other day, um, one of the foremen was talking to me about I knew that I was a religious person and that I was Jewish, and he was asking me about why is it that churches take all this money but they don't give back to their flock because there's a lot of people that can't afford to give charity. They give charity to churches and the churches don't give back. And I'm like, I can't tell you anything about that because I'm
Mhm.
not Christian. I'm not involved
Yeah.
in the church, so I don't have an opinion. But I can tell you that in Judaism we have free loans, and I give money to the poor. He's like, "Oh, really? You have money? Well, give me money." I'm like, "Sure, no, I definitely." I'm like, "Fine, sure, I'll give it to you." But just letting you know that if you take charity, that means you're a poor person, and if you're not poor and you take charity, and then eventually you will become poor. So,
Mhm.
do you want charity? Because I'll give it to you, but the
Mhm.
question is, you need it. And then he slinked back. He's like, no, that wasn't what he was like trying to say. And
Mhm.
he was very flustered because he comes from one of the Central American countries where it's just very frustrating, where people just there are just very, very dirt poor and
Mhm.
they're just struggling.
I know. I
Um,
know.
but you
I know.
were,
I've had friends from that area. I know. I hear the stories. Hear all the stories. There's one friend of mine. Her daughter from Honduras. Her daughter studied very very hard to become a lawyer, and her daughter can't even practice law in Honduras because if she were to practice law, most likely she would be prosecuting the drug kingpins, and she would be dead. And she knows it. And that's Sarah. And so sorry to study all those years and put all that effort. And so her daughter, basically, what she's doing is she whenever there's a sale at one of these like very good children's clothing stores,
yeah,
you know, she will buy up a lot of merchandise on sale, send it to her daughter in Honduras, and her daughter resells it in Honduras.
interesting.
So that's the business that her daughter had to go into an actual business, instead of actually being able to use her college degree, her training.
Wow. Yeah. Now that I'm trying to veer off into a different topic. Um,
But you mentioned something about like I remember there was a woman I worked with who was Catholic, and she said that the priest that week announced that all the money in the plate that they were passing around was going to go for a family in their congregation who the father had lost his job and they needed help, and so all he wanted to make an announcement that all the money that week was going to go for this family. And she said she was really surprised and very impressed. She said that was the first time in her whole life as a Catholic that any priest had done that. for a family in their congregation rather than have all the money go to the church. No, this week it's going for the. So I said, you know what? I'd like to give to this family. I said, I remember when my husband was unemployed, and I said I'd like to give to this family. And so I gave her I think maybe like a $5 bill, something like that. And so she said she's going to put it in an envelope and mark it for the family when
Yeah,
she puts it in the plate that Sunday.
that's awesome. That's really sweet. So we originally tried to talk about From Kite, and
Hmm.
you were talking about how Shabbos affected you and how finding out what Shabbos really was versus what you were taught when you were younger.
Hmm.
How malacha is a physical and chemical change.
Yeah, what happened was the unfortunately, a lot of Jews at the time were very uneducated, like my parents and my grandparents. And so when they thought you're not supposed to do work on Shabbos, they thought they meant real hard physical work. And it's, the funny thing is about the people who are not raised with too much Jewish education is when you ask them for explanations, for some reason, all the explanations goes back to years ago in Europe. I don't know why, but that's all their explanations. Years ago in Europe, and therefore we don't do this because now we live in America and we have modern conveniences. So they're what they thought. I overheard my grandfather talking once. He goes, "Oh," he says, "Of course," he says, "it was a lot of work to take out the horse and to hitch the horse to the wagon and to put on the bridle and and to do all this." He says, "But now you just get in the car and you turn the key. It's no work." So that's what I was raised thinking that, the laws against Shabbos are about work, work, and now we have modern conveniences, so therefore we don't have to really observe Shabbos anymore. So then when I went to Minnesota that year when I was just becoming from, um, I was taking a class in halacha, and they were talking about the malachas, the 39 malachas, and I'm listening to them, and I'm thinking back to my seventh grade science class where we learned one of the first classes we learned was about differences between a chemical and a physical change. And I'm listening to the malachas, I'm going, so that's what a malacha is. A malacha is a chemical or physical change. So I came back home after Minnesota and I said to my family, guess what? I said, when they talk about not working on Shabbos, they're not talking about back-breaking actual labor. They're talking about making a physical or a chemical change. And when you put the key in the ignition and you turn it, you cause a spark plug. I said, you're making a chemical change. I said, this is why we don't drive on Shabbos, not because hitching the horse was so difficult. And the same thing with kashrus. Yeah, I think we went this before in one of our podcasts that friends of mine who went to reform temples, they told them, oh, that there's no reason kashrus anymore because see, years ago in Europe, everybody had wooden bowls and and like the fat from the meat would get in between the crevices of the wooden bowls and cause a lot of bacteria. And that's why they kept separation between meat and milk. But we don't have to do that anymore because now we have bowls that are made out of porcelain and ceramic or whatever. And I thought even before I became from, I was thinking about that. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, and said, wait a minute. I said, I remember going to the museums and seeing glassware from ancient Greece and Rome. So wait a minute, they had glassware and ceramic ware in those days. I said, so that old European explanation doesn't make sense.
So you mentioned beforehand. Oh, and by the way, try to make sure your hands don't touch the table because it's shaking. It shakes the camera.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But you were talking to me about a story of when you're going to your niece's baby naming, and that you had this moment of it being Shabbos and trying to
Yeah.
walk on Shabbos and not necessarily take a car on Shabbos. This is when you just started becoming from.
What happened was, well, I had already moved up to New York, so I'd already made the commitment to From Kite, but it's very hard when you come back and visit family and you're you're trying to maintain your standards in an environment, you know, in an environment that's, I can say, a Jewish environment, but it's not really al pi halacha. And you have relatives and friends that can't understand, like, wait a minute, we keep a Jewish home and we keep this level of kashrus, and like you must be. They used to call it mashuga from. You must be mashuga from. So what happened was with my sister's baby naming, I found a family that was within Shomer Shabbos family that was within walking distance of the conservative temple where the baby naming was going to be. So I stayed by them. And then I walked to the conservative temple and they had the baby naming. And then we came out, everybody was getting in the car to go to my sister's house, which was actually, technically it was about a mile away. So it was within walking distance. And as we're coming out to the car, I'm looking at the sky and I'm noticing it's not quite after Shabbos. Still, it's still light in the sky. It's not bright, bright light, but it's coming towards, it's like around sunset, you might say. It's a little bit past sunset, but it's not totally after Shabbos yet. And I was very reluctant to get in the car. I didn't know what to do. And someone behind me came up and hit me on the shoulder and said, "In the car." And I didn't, it's one of the things where, you don't want to make a scene, you don't want to get into a fight. And so I went along with it. I got in the car and I felt so badly about it afterwards. And that I should have, like being where I am today and the age I am today, I certainly wouldn't have taken that from somebody. I would have just stepped away and said, "Nope, I'm not going near the car. Sorry, guys. I'll see you at the house. Bye bye." I would have gone off walking. But at that time, especially just becoming from and being young and still attached to your family, you know, you you don't have that kind of courage of conviction yet, and that stamina of conviction to be able to take a stand like that at that point.
So now that we're talking about like when you were from, being from, not being from, this obviously has an identity, not crisis, but like a search. So when would you say you felt your most authentic self?
When I um that's what I liked about becoming prom. So we remember we were just talking about the word the other day when we were discussing
Oh,
it.
Aurora or
Amina,
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 the
yeah,
English term
Amina
for soul
Green.
or something like that.
I was doing Wordscape, and I just I just plugged in. I just looked at the word Amina, Amina, and I thought maybe that'll fit. I don't know if there's any word such as this, but yeah, I'll put it anyway. I put it in. Turned out to be a legitimate word. So I looked it up on the little thing. You press this little icon to look up the definition of some of the words that you plugged in. And it said Amina. Amina is an inner soul, like an unconscious inner soul of a person, basically like the real them. And that's how I felt was when I became from that I finally felt comfortable with myself, that I wasn't making excuses. I wasn't trying to be something that I really wasn't.
So, normally after Shabbos, there's like Havdalah, the ritual of saying goodbye to the Shabbos queen. Do you remember your first experience?
Oh yeah, it was like wonderful. Like I'm standing there looking at the Havdalah candle, I'm thinking to myself, "Pinch me! I can't believe I'm here."
Where were you?
So, I think I was by from family that someone had contacted for me that became basically became my standard Shabbos family here in Baltimore.
So when you were a kid,
Mhm.
did you see any religious kids? Did you notice religious kids?
Yes, I saw, yeah, I saw them, and we had some that actually were attending the public school,
Hmm.
and, I remember seeing a few of them here and there, I saw them walking around the neighborhood. In college, there was at Towson University, there was a whole group that came from the Park Heights area at the time. It was like a whole contingency, you might say, of from kids that were attending Towson at the time. And I mean, they were nice, they weren't mean, but they were kind of like they kept to themselves, for probably very good reason. They kept to themselves because they were trying. I can appreciate that now that it's not that they're being snobby, it's that they're trying to protect themselves against assimilation, knowing that they're in a totally non-Jewish environment, and I can't blame them
Mhm.
for doing that. Now, Chabad, our saying in Chabad is when we meet a non-religious Jew, we call that a customer.
Yeah.
So, but these kids, these were your standard, Litvish, whatever, Western, Orthodox Jewish kids. And there was the Orthodox community here in Baltimore was very, uh, they tried to be very insular. They really wanted to protect themselves. And I saw a lot of that.
I guess, did you notice any from kite in your family for Shabbos? Like, maybe lighting Shabbos candles
Well,
or
my mother, yeah, my mother lit Shabbos candles. One thing she did, she always lit Shabbos candles. As a matter of fact, I remember one time, there was this Goyish guy who invited me out on a date Friday night, and when he came to my house to pick me up, my mother was out. My mother had gone out shopping, and she says, "Make sure before you leave the house, you put the Shabbos candles in the sink. You know, not to put them up, but you wanted to put them in a safe middle area. And if she would leave the house, if she let, not, we weren't, she lit Shabbos candles, but we weren't Shomer Shabbos. So a lot of times Friday night, she would go shopping later on, and she would, before she left the house, uh, as a safety precaution, she would put the lighted Shabbos candles in the sink. So in case they fell over, there would be no, problems. And he comes in, they said, "So wait a minute, I've got to put my candles in the sink." And he goes, "Ooh, how fancy." He goes, "Candles." He could be nothing Jewish. He didn't know about women lighting Shabbos candles. I have a funny story about that, by the way. A number of months ago, I was past, every now and then when I'm shop I always keep some, like, little Shabbos candle kits on me with tea lights and maybe some brochures, or, printouts to pass around to, like, non-religious Jewish women who I meet in the store. So there was this one woman, I offered her, a Shabbos candle, and she says, "Well, she's not Jewish, but her husband is." I said, "Well, it's really a woman's mitzvah, but your husband can light for himself." And so she says, "I'll take one. It's about time he did something for himself."
very cute. Um, so I guess what other positive experiences with Shabbos did you have? I guess growing up, being a teenager, young adult, um, besides your mother lighting Shabbos candles. But did your father maybe go to shul Friday night, or did you guys have a meal Friday night?
Well, when we lived in Baltimore City, we had a nice Shabbos meal Friday night with kugel and chicken soup and all that good stuff. And challah. My mother didn't bake challah, but she would buy challah. But we never made the brachas. I didn't know about making kiddush Friday night, or washing your hands or making bracha challah. In fact, when I was in high school, a friend of mine also she wasn't they weren't that religious. They were like conservative, whatever, conservative docs, you want to call it. So she invited me over her house to sleep over for Friday night, and it surprised me that her family, the boys in her family and the father would actually make kiddush. They would put on yarmulkes and would actually make kiddush break for Hagafen, which surprised me a lot that they
Interesting.
did that. We didn't do any of that. I didn't know about that until I went to my first Shabbos family and saw how they made kiddush, and then got up and then washed hamotzi and then made the bracha over the challah. And that's one thing that my mother, in a way, really appreciated about me becoming from, when she saw how I ate, that I washed my hands, that I, made the tiras yadayim, I sat, I made a bracha. And she says, "This is so wonderful the way you eat. You just don't sit and grab the food. You, like some animals, and you eat like a human being."
Hmm.
And that part of it she appreciated. Oh, a funny thing happened to my mother though. After I was already married and had Kanai had was on my way, creating helping to create our family. My mother told me the story that she was in a department store, and that there was this she was talking to a friend of hers, and they were just having a conversation, and they see this frum woman with these three little kids and one in the oven. And she's looking at the clothes and at the clothing at the children's center, and she's at the children's department, and she's picking out clothes, and my mother's friend whispers to her, "Rena, look at that, isn't that disgusting, and you and I have to pay for it." And my mother got so angry, she turned around to this friend of hers and she says, "Listen, you, my daughter happens to be one of those people." And the woman's like, "Really? Really?" She goes, "Yes. And she has adorable little children. And when she has the next one, that'll be perfectly fine."
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you think about it logically, we still haven't played catch up from 1945. So we're still kind of like backtrack. We're still on back order. Um,
Well, my mother one time asked me, she says, "Why are you having all these kids?" And I said, "Well," I said, my husband and I are very committed to replenishing the 6 million Jews lost in the Holocaust." And my mother says, "Yes, but must you do it single-handedly?"
I do it single handedly. It's fine. No big deal. I'm pretty sure like every one of us are, very happy that you had us. Um, Speaking of which, actually, how do you think you did raising a from family?
Well, The proof is in the pudding.
Walk, 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 walk.
But like I said when we were having our conversation before, I would appreciate it if more of you were more observant about Chalav Yisrael.
Yeah, sure. We're gonna hold by Moshe Feinstein, and Moshe Feinstein was a big Rav who said it was okay for in America to hold by,
Wait a
standards.
minute. I was Moshe Feinstein was alive and well living in New York when I was living in New York. And evidently he was upset that there were many times that he was misinterpreted and misquoted. And he was very strict on Chalav Yisrael. And he said that, you know, the problem with
Heter?
Heterim are like a football. People grab it and run with it.
Mm, 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 mm.
That's how
I know, and
you know.
I'm
That's
agreeing
how.
with you.
That's how.
I'm
That's how.
you with you.
That's how a Jew starts. To
That's
come
how it starts.
to come away
Look,
from
I
God.
agree. I'm just being obnoxious
Hmm.
because on some level, if you do too many heterim, it just turns into this mush of like you can't. You start like losing the identity, you start losing the spice of Judaism, in my opinion.
See, what it is people don't understand is that the heter for not keeping Chalav Yisrael was um, when years ago in this country when it was very hard to get a hold of Chalav Yisrael, very very hard. So the question was, especially with pregnant women and children that really needed the calcium, really at the time needed the milk. So they said, okay, if you can't get a hold of it, it's okay. But if you stop to think about it now, there's no excuse for not keeping Chalav Yisrael. In fact, Chalav Yisrael, if you look, is in the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch in English. Okay, and so people say, well, what's the big deal? It's only milk. Well, how about wine? What's the big deal? It's only grapes. That's because we Kabbalistically we believe that there's certain foods that there's two components to foods, a physical component and a spiritual component. And milk is one of these foods which is spiritually sensitive, and that the production that goes into it, the people watching it, the people observing it, the milking, that this picks up the spirituality of the people that are around that production. Same thing with wine.
And you can use your cholesterol milk with Chutzpah Coffee coming out to this not store near you, but you can find it online at where is it? What's the website? Chutzpahcoffee.com. That's ChutzpahCoffeeco.com.
Can you show it to the put it up like is there a way of
Yeah, done.
magnifying it? Okay.
It's fine. Chutzpah Coffee. Um, so my other
And by
question,
the way, if you stop to think about it,
yeah,
especially in places, like Baltimore, New York, where everything, even confections, ice cream, everything is available now in Chalav Yisrael. The only excuse for not keeping it is nothing but titles. Stop it.
All right. Thank you so much. So my other question you had, I was realizing in the 1960s, when you started becoming from, there definitely was a feeling of change. And I felt that maybe there was a generation gap where people that grew up, were born in the 20s, grew up in the 30s and 40s, had families in the 50s and 60s. The teenagers of the 50s and 60s were almost total opposite. Like, it's such a huge generation gap. Because you look at today with like people from 2024 and 2010, I mean, there's some difference, but not a huge amount of difference. But can you tell me how that was with a generation gap and feeling of the wanting to be more spiritual and what exactly guided you to that?
I remember in the 1960s when I was going into my preteen and teen years, the discussion about the generation gap was very, very prevalent. You heard a lot about it because there was a very, very big generation gap between my parents' generation and mine. And I'm sure in many ways it was between their parents, especially like their parents were, for the most part, were pogrom survivors. And in many instances, didn't know from what it was like to go to an American high school or to even have their parents didn't even have their parents had no teenage years. Their parents, in many cases, went from being a young child to at the age of 8 or 9, maybe 10, being forced to get out there and work.
Mhm.
And then here, their parents came to this country, and now their children are going to junior high and high school. And it's like, hey, what do you mean sitting behind a book? What kind of laziness is this? Get up and start working. My mother tells me that the way, unfortunately, that she gained a lot of weight as a teenager was if her mother, unfortunately, being raised in Tsarist Russia, never had any education. Most girls did not in the, in the before World War One. And her mother got married when she was 17. So if my mother would sit with a book, her mother would look at her and go, what are you doing? What kind of just sitting with a book? Because there's work to be done around the house. Get up, start sweeping, do the dishes, start, wiping the furniture, yeah. They don't just sit there with a book. So, but the only time her mother would leave her alone is if she was eating.
Mm.
And that's how she gained a lot of weight, because she knew as long as she was eating, her mother wasn't going to bother her about getting up and going to work. My father, um, his father, I think, never went to high school. I think his father, same thing. His father barely had any type of adolescence or childhood in those days. So when my father um, was in 10th grade, that's when the Depression hit, and his father was on his case to quit high school and get to work. He says, we need the money. We're really starving. And my father, in fact, there are many young people in those days, and my father's age, that quit high school and just had to go to work for the family to this, you're talking about starvation. They really, needed to do that. And then so when my generation came around, the pampered generation, first of all, our parents didn't have television. So here, my generation had television. Like, wow, television opened up an entire new world of toys, of all these different products, of commercialism, of adventures. I mean, and it wasn't like you had to go. No, it wasn't like you had to go to the movies to see movies, to actually, uh, get some the sense of
Entertainment.
as entertainment. You had it in your house. And then the space age hit, where we could sit on televisions and actually watch rocket launches on television. There was also the new psychology that came around at the time. I think we went over this with Dr. Chaim Genot, the famous Israeli psychologist, who he was the one that started the idea of raising your kids being solution oriented, stop blaming, stop hitting, stop punishing.
Yes.
Let's solve the problem. So my parents, that was something that was very foreign to my parents. Many parents in my parents' generation was like, just, shut up and just do what we tell you. There was no discussion. You just do what your parents do. You just tote the line, do what your parents tell you. And so and so that was, also one of the problems, because I remember many times my mother asking my father to talk to me about something I did wrong. And my father would just come right over to me and slap me across the face. And my mother said, what did you do? I told you to talk to her. My father would yell at her, talking does no good.
Interesting.
Yeah. By the way, he changed many years later.
Yeah.
He did change. He did, because my younger sister, I remember one time my younger sister really, like getting angry at him about something, mouthing off to something, and she says, "Go ahead, you're going to hit me." And he says, "No." He says, "I'm not going to hit you. So I'm really going to discuss this with you." Yeah, he did come around to that eventually, but it was a whole new cultural thing, a whole new way of thinking for them.
Do you feel like there was maybe any emotional dependency that your parents put on you?
Isn't there always in every Jewish family?
No, I understand your experience
Jewish guilt.
of it, not just Jewish guilt. It was more of like
Uh,
they use you as a backboard of what they're going through in life.
Trying to think about that.
Like they kind of use you as
Yeah,
a therapist kind of way.
something is interesting. You bring that up. I've seen parents who have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
What do you
seen
think about
parents
that?
who've done that. Oh, of course, that's very unfair. No, that's your kid. Your kid's not your
Mhm.
therapist. No,
Okay.
no, but yeah.
No.
I remember, like, my mother sharing with me some of the problems that she was having with her mother-in-law.
Or like what? Like what? Like what? They're dead. It's not doesn't matter anymore. You could tell us. You could tell us. Like what?
Um, my mother used to call her mother-in-law tactless.
Tactless.
And I remember if my mother, I think we went this on one of the podcasts, we were talking about when her mother-in-law one time would give her a dress for her birthday or for a present. As my mother was taking it out of the package, her mother-in-law would say to her, "That's good for stout people."
Oh, wow.
And I remember my father getting a present from his father. It was a shirt. And his father would do was he would give his father, like, clothes for, like, either Father's Day or his birthday, and my grandfather, like, months later, would repack it and give it back to my father for his birthday or for Father's Day.
I mean, did he wear it at least? Did it
I
fit?
think so, yeah. My father would open up the package and go, "Okay, here's the shirt I gave to my father last year. I guess I'll keep it."
When did you realize your parents weren't just parents, but people? Like, live with their own lives?
Gosh, that takes a while. It's usually it's usually once you get married and start raising your family.
Yeah.
And I think every child, well, you're probably going through
Yeah, I'm
that.
with her right now, and that's why I'm asking. I
Yeah.
mean, duh.
But, everyone goes through that. When you're a kid, it's conditioning. It's basic classical conditioning, because 'cause you're born, and you're young when your neurons are developing and your brain's developing. To you, your parents are like God, and, you don't start, it's so inculcated in you to think of your parents of never doing anything wrong and being actual fallible human beings, that yes, they can make mistakes. And it takes a while. But also what happens is, as you know yourself, that you're going to learn as your children get older, you're going to be in situations where you're going to say, "Ah, that's why my parents did that."
Well, I'm definitely getting that now, even though it's just still fresh, it's still new. But understanding like just the push Tati had, the push, how much he had to really get up and go and move, and how he had to really get stuff going, and just
Mhm,
just the trying to find the right word for it. I don't want to say angst, but like the gumption that he
mhm.
had to get up in the morning, wake up at 5 o'clock, start his day and go to work.
The chutzpah, like the coffee.
The chutzpah, just like Chutzpah Coffee, brought to you by Chutzpah Coffee, lightly roasted, boldly Jewish. You can pick it up at chutzpahcoffeeco.com.
Think of it not as coffee, think of it as a way of life.
Ah, it's not just coffee, it's Jewish coffee. All right, I don't think there's a time limit on this, because we've been going on for a while. Well, I just want to conclude with thank you, Chutzpah Coffee, for sponsoring this episode, and you have a wonderful Shabbos,
You
and
too.
enjoy.
Okay, love you.
Bye bye.